Right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are excited to be presenting this webinar on safety planning during COVID-19. We're just going to give another minute or two just to let people settle in, get everything started, and then I will do some housekeeping introductions and we'll turn it over to today's presenters. So I'll give it one more minute. All right. Well, it looks like we are at capacity, so I suppose there's no real reason to just continue to wait. It looks like everyone is here and at 100%, so I will go ahead and start the information. So my name is Gretchen Shaw. I'm the Deputy Director here at NCADV, and I will be moderating and managing today's webinar. So as you're sharing, please locate a few items in your control panel. We have handouts available, at least a copy of the PowerPoint with notes to follow along. And we also have a question box. So we will be answering questions at the end of the webinar. If you have a question, please be sure to enter it into the question box rather than the chat box. We'd like to leave the chat box available to you so that you can chat throughout the webinar, or chat with others, connect with others there. So just know that we will be sending you a copy of this webinar, a recording of it, as well as any handouts and a link to a certificate of attendance. So you'll be sure to receive that. Also today, we just know that we're not offering closed captioning for this webinar, but if you would like a copy of the transcript following, please email me at gshaw@ncadv.org. Additionally, this webinar is being recorded, as I mentioned. Again, submit your questions via the question box and we'll answer any questions at the end of the webinar. Additionally, we offer a 5-question survey at the end, so that is a way for us to gather feedback from you all, and we use that information to hopefully improve upon webinars in the future. NCADV has, I'm sure, like everyone, been struggling to keep up with the vast amount of information coming out quickly about COVID-19. And as such, we've created a special page on our website that helps organize resources. So we have a booklet available there of all the resources that we know of at this point, organized by topic. You can click on any of these buttons on that web page to either find those resources, connect with NCADV. If you're able to support NCADV during this COVID-19 timeframe, we would certainly appreciate your response. Legislative updates and action alerts, and then learn about any other webinars or educational events that are occurring across the nation, and then catch up on any media coverage. So that webpage is ncadv.org/COVID-19 and domestic violence, all separated by hyphens. Again, we are offering free webinars specific to COVID-19 as they develop. We've been we've been trying to put them together as quickly as we can. So if you go to ncadv.org/webinars, you'll see others available as we have that information. Normally, additionally, we provide these webinars free to only NCADV members and those who choose to attend at a specific cost. But in the midst of COVID-19, we are providing the information for free. If you have the capacity to do so, please consider donating to NCADV or becoming a member today. Additionally, we encourage you to tweet along with today's webinar. You can use the hashtag #AdvoChat and follow NCADV on Twitter at @NCADV. Additionally, we like to know who's on the webinar today. So we're going to do just a series of quick polls. It won't take very long, but we just want to get to know you a little bit better. All right. So who's participating today? All right. It looks like the majority of people identify as domestic violence or sexual assault advocate. There's some law enforcement, case managers, counselors, and others. I'll be watching the chat box here. Okay. So we'll share the poll results. That'll come up here. Oh, I gotta share my screen. Forgive me, I'm feeling a little bit rusty today. What results? I apologize, I'm not able to share my screen today. Regardless, it sounds like the majority of people are domestic violence advocates. Oh, there you go. Okay. All right, next, we're interested to know where you're located. All right, we've got a lot of people on the East Coast and the Midwest, and then the southern states and Puerto Rico. Got about half people voting. All right, I'll share that. Great. Okay, we'll move on to the next question. This question is if you choose to identify. We use this just for our own internal purposes. And sometimes funders like to know our impact and the makeup of our reach. So if you choose to answer this question, thank you, and no worries if not. I'll give folks another minute here. All right. So it looks like the majority of people identify as white or Caucasian with some Hispanic or Latinx, and then Black, African American, or Caribbean. Okay, just a couple more. And then how do you define your community type? So urban, suburban, or rural? All right, it looks like we've got about 40% who have answered. All right, it looks like the majority of people are in rural areas, followed by urban and suburban. Great. One more question and then we'll move on. All right, and we're interested in knowing your field or the profession. Your profession. So if you could just choose from below. Yeah, the majority of people look like they identify as a DV or SA advocate. Others, there's my chat box. Okay. All right, very good. Yeah. Not surprisingly, the majority of people are identify as a domestic violence or sexual assault advocate. Fabulous. All right, thank you all so much for that. So today's webinar is domestic violence and safety planning during COVID-19. And we are pleased to be hosting this on behalf of the Jewish Family Service Association of Cleveland. Today's presenters are May Bennett, who is JFSA's Domestic Violence Service Manager, and Grace Miller, who is JFSA's Comprehensive Community Advocate. I'm going to read quick bios. May Bennett is a licensed independent social worker with a social work bachelor's degree from Ursuline College and a master's degree in applied social sciences from Case Western Reserve University. She has over 15 years of experience in victim advocacy, including working at domestic violence shelters and a police department, providing justice system advocacy to all victims of crime. Ms. Bennett is a manager of domestic violence services at Jewish Family Service Association of Cleveland, where she supervises direct service staff in addition to the No Abuse Teen Dating Violence Prevention Program. She is EMDR trained and provides trauma-specific therapy to clients. Ms. Bennett also conducts trainings and presentations to the community. Grace Miller currently serves as a victim advocate with Jewish Family Service Association's Domestic Violence Services. She currently attends Case Western Reserve University to obtain her master's in applied social sciences. She works closely with JFA's No Abuse Teen Dating Prevention Program through her master's field placement. So thank you both so much for presenting this today. I will now turn over the presentation to Ms. Miller.
Okay, awesome.
All right, let me close this poll. I don't think I managed to. Hang on. There we go. All right, so bear with us. We may just need a minute to, there we go.
All right.
All right, Grace will figure out the technology stuff, and I'll just talk for a little bit. So what happened was mid-March is when our state of Ohio was officially shut down by our governor, and we continued to work. And we worked in creative ways that we're going to talk about during the presentation. But from that, what we noticed is that safety planning, which is so vital to the work that we do with survivors, really had to change and become even more creative. Most especially because of the stay-at-home order and this understanding that folks might be in the house with the perpetrator. And so what does that look like and what does that mean? And so that's kind of where we birthed this idea of training specific to safety planning during COVID. So first, we're going to start with a brief introduction just about the services we offer, just so all of you can understand where we're coming from. We're going to talk about risk factors for survivors during the COVID-19 pandemic. We'll also talk about safety planning solutions and solutions specific to children. I hate going to presentations where all they talk about is the problem and not the solutions. So the solution piece is going to be the majority of what we talk about. And then finally, we absolutely have to have a discussion about self-care for ourselves because we're all experiencing this crisis together. So Jewish Family Service Association of Cleveland is a large private nonprofit behavioral health organization. And within Jewish Family Service Association, one of the programs is domestic violence services. It's been around since 1875. Person does not have to identify as Jewish to get services. And then in domestic violence services, we are community-based, which is slightly different than the majority of shelter-based programs. So we provide comprehensive case management and advocacy. There's also educational support groups, trauma-specific yoga, trauma-specific therapy, and no abuse teen dating violence prevention program. We utilize the empowerment model, and we always go from the trauma-informed care approach, which I pray that everyone is familiar with trauma-informed care. And our services are no cost, and the only requirement is that they are 18 or older.
Another piece is that we are located in the suburbs of Cleveland on the east side, since Gretchen talked about where everyone's located, we're in the suburbs, and then there is a separate domestic violence agency that's more in the urban part of Cleveland, but we focus in the suburbs.
So we're gonna kick it off by making sure that everyone has the same definition of domestic violence. So we know that domestic violence is a repeated pattern of behavior where one person attempts to have power and control over another person. When we talk about the legal definition in Ohio, what that means is there's physical violence or threats of physical violence. And I know across the country, the domestic violence laws say something similar in each of the states. But we're going to be speaking from a place of the social service definition of domestic violence. And so that can include physical, sexual, verbal, emotional, spiritual, or financial abuse. Anyone can experience domestic violence, regardless of age, race, religion, socioeconomic status, etc. It's ongoing and it usually escalates. And I'm going to tell you, in all the years I've been doing this work, I have never seen it escalate as quickly as it has been since COVID started. And then I love this quote at the bottom of the slide that talks about the number of domestic violence cases has spiked, making up more than half of all violent crimes in the US. And that was just 2018. So I'm sure that may have increased since then.
So I'm happy to see there's so many advocates on this webinar. Hello, fellow advocates. We all know, for those who are in the work already and for those who may not be as familiar, these are the typical barriers to leaving an abusive relationship. Many of you may already know this. However, it's important to keep in mind that due to COVID-19, a lot of these barriers have become even more amplified or have escalated. There also may be unique barriers in mix with some of these that may be at play. So it's important to keep in mind the foundation of why survivors might have a difficult time leaving, and then taking in the specific risk factors that I'll talk about related to COVID-19 that make this even more difficult. I'll just say, for one example, fear of losing custody of children, or even lack of financial independence, the unique circumstances of COVID-19 that relate to more financial instability or uncertainty about who has custody over the kids, especially if the parents are separated and the children can't be moving back and forth. There's even more unique barriers to this, in addition with what we already know. So I'll kind of move through each type of abuse. And again, as May mentioned, we'll just go over this a little more briefly because we want to focus on the solutions and what we can do now, because I'm sure many of you are seeing this and are aware of what's happening. But I will mention that right now, because of COVID-19 and in the work that I'm doing and experiencing with clients, perpetrators are feeling less in control. And we know that when this happens, the abuse escalates. We see this happen when victims attempt to leave the relationship. This is the most dangerous time, as we know, and perpetrators feel this loss of control because that person they had so much control over has left. So this is where we're seeing this happen. However, in this case, they might still be in the same household together, which can be even more dangerous. What we're seeing is that we're experiencing less calls, and just within the state of Ohio, this has been happening with most agencies in Ohio, and I'm sure across the nation. But there is increased violence, especially among the police. The police are getting even more calls, but there is the inability for victims to necessarily reach out to domestic violence agencies as they may have been able to before.
And I want to say, I just want to interject that this is really the calm before the storm. And across the country, domestic violence agencies are agreeing that once the stay-at-home orders start to be lifted, we are expecting to have a huge influx of clients.
Absolutely. And I think right now, what's causing all of these risk factors is this close proximity with the perpetrator. I will say that really some of the clients I'm speaking to right now and I'm able to speak to within length are those that are still able to go to work, who may work for a hospital system or are a frontline worker. Those who are trapped at home really do not have the ability to call, and we'll talk more about this and how to plan around that. But I think, as May said, when these orders are lifted and survivors will have the ability to reach out to this support, we are expecting that influx of survivors. So again, looking at both the physical and emotional risk factors of COVID-19, Again, the court systems are kind of all put on hold right now, and sometimes they're trying to do things over the phone. I'm sure this is differing across the country. And even when it comes to protection orders, needing to do those online, there's a lot of uncertainty, and even with how long this is processing. The other issue, which we will talk more in length about, is accessing shelter, either being afraid of being exposed to COVID-19 by seeking shelter, or shelter not even being available just because they're full, or there's the shelters just aren't in a place right now to even accept people, even if they have the space, because they don't have proper protocol in place. Additionally, as I mentioned, there's just a lack of support for victims right now because they're in such close proximity to the abuser. They might not even be able to seek therapy or support from even a loved one or a family member who normally they would have been able to talk to. Additionally, children are locked in the house as well, which can lead to a lot more tension, can also contribute to escalating abuse or having children more exposed to this abuse that's occurring that they normally maybe wouldn't be exposed to. Again, this can also call for more control over the family routine and household because the perpetrator is there at all times. This just depends on how they may choose to abuse the survivor, and can also lead to further isolation by not letting the victim leave the house or just completely controlling who they're able to communicate with. This also leads into the verbal piece, which, of course, with this increased proximity, there's a heightened verbal abuse. And I've really heard this with almost every client I've been working with now, just nonstop name calling and criticizing, and that kind of inconsistency, using the silent treatment, and then just the chaos of being with them at all times. And also using threats of COVID-19 as a weapon, either threatening to throw them out in the street in order to have the victim comply or submit to the abuser, or even saying, I'll expose the kids. Again, using COVID-19 as a tool of control to further control the victim. This is really what we're seeing a lot of at this time.
And I just
Again,
want to point out that all of these risk factors are for survivors, no matter what type of situation they're in. So they may be living with the perpetrator, they may be broken up from the perpetrator and they share children together. They may be broken up from the perpetrator and don't share children together. So all of that, as Grace is going through all of the different types of abuse.
yes, absolutely. So they don't just have to live with them, it's happening to everybody, as May said. And another piece for those specifically living with the abuser, this can lead to increased reproductive coercion, which we can see as either trying to force pregnancy or even having more control over their contraceptives, or questioning access right now to whether abortions are even available, and if the victim would even be able to safely access one if that were a choice they needed to make. This last piece is something to keep in mind. This is specific to the Jewish population, but it's important to keep in mind the cultural factors for other groups that may come into play. So for example, the mikvah is a ritual that Jewish women are required to complete after their period in order for them to engage in intercourse. And so there's issues with them even being able to access this because either the mikvahs are closed, usually they'd have to go to a synagogue to do this, they might be closed, or the perpetrator might again use this as a way to control them from even being able to go. And they may force them to engage in sexual activity without them being able to do this. So again, just keeping in mind the cultural pieces that your clients may be experiencing that may amplify the risk factors of COVID-19. This ties into spiritual, again, challenges with practicing religion, especially if the perpetrator is very controlling over what the victim can do, whether it's forcing them to practice their religion or controlling them or prohibiting them from practicing their own religion. Another piece, again, just more isolation from their religious community, not being able to go to services and being disconnected in that way. the last piece I'll mention in terms of risk factors is financial. And what I've been seeing in my work is a huge escalation of financial abuse. With all of this, there is an influx of financial resources becoming available. And just in general, the lack of financial instability, especially if people are now unemployed, waiting for unemployment benefits, all of the certain circumstances that may have arisen due to COVID-19, are just leading to more stress. And again, that loss of control for the perpetrator, which can just escalate the abuse in general. However, I think like the stimulus checks, unemployment benefits, this is a way for the abuser to further control the victim. I had one victim just get her tax refund, and the perpetrator took the money and completely spent it all. And she was planning to use that to, find a way to escape. So I've had to work on safety planning with her on what else can we do, where can we go from here, how can she protect her stimulus check once she does receive that. So what we've been seeing are kind of jeopardized escape plans, because if a survivor did have funds to escape, they might have needed to use this towards the financial instability that they may have as a result of COVID-19. So there's so many different scenarios that arise, and it's different for everybody. So we'll talk more about how to kind of work with clients according to this.
So some other considerations, which I'm gonna be very transparent. The reason we titled this slide this is just because it's a hodgepodge of different things that we were unsure of how to label them. So helping clients with language to use if they have to go to the ER because of violence. So we had an instance where there was a client that needed to go to the ER because she was strangled, and the ER staff were looking for COVID and asked her if she was coughing, and she said yes because she was strangled, and they actually turned her away from the ER. So that's just one example of helping clients think of those types of things, especially going into the ER or into some other hospital setting. Mm-hmm. Inmates are being released due to COVID-19. We've had tons of safety planning having to happen with our survivors, just because the safety plan was that the perpetrator was in prison or in jail, and because they were being released, that may not be safe anymore. Current police responses, they are just doing the best they can, just like we all are, but calls for domestic disturbances have increased. And there are a couple of cities around us that I've spoken with that have seen that increase of violence as well for those calls. So perhaps coaching and helping victims understand what might happen if they do call the police. Then there's heightened stress triggering trauma symptoms. And what we know is this is a somewhat unique time in our history, because every single person within the whole country is experiencing the trauma response at the exact same time, and maybe not even the country, maybe the world. And so when we have survivors that already have experienced the trauma response, and then you're putting this on top of it, they definitely will be extra triggered. Guns and ammunition has been flying off the shelves, something to keep in mind, because risk of homicide increases by 500% in domestic violence cases when there's guns. And then custody agreements might allow the perpetrator to have the kids. There has been so many different webinars that I've attended and different folks that I've spoken with about this, specifically because clients try to keep the kids safe, and perhaps risk of COVID infection is high with the perpetrator. But one training I went to said that the judge allowed that the doctor cannot control that, the custody piece of it. And so whatever the court said, that's how the agreement must go. And that might even look like the perpetrator getting the kids. And then another training that I went to said, no, doctors can write a note. So the end result of all of that is that we are all just trying to figure this thing out.
Another piece I'll add, sorry, is with the back to the guns. I know in Ohio that gun stores, or like where guns are sold, are considered to be essential. So I don't know how it is across the US, but for that to still remain open has also contributed to it being sold, and again, increasing that risk for survivors.
Statistics haven't come out yet, obviously, but what we're hearing across Ohio is that homicide has increased, homicide in general, but also intimate partner homicide. So a couple of things for us to remember. Again, these are very basic safety planning pieces that the client is the expert of their life. So any safety planning that's done must be survivor driven. And so we base our safety planning off of Jacqueline Campbell's model, the lethality assessment, but to always understand that the survivor is the expert. Each plan is unique to the situation and to the survivor. And so our job really is to teach the survivor how to plan. Because what happens is we can plan all day long, but then the reality might look very different. So if we teach folks how to plan for their safety, then they're able to adapt as needed. We always have to remember to use a trauma-informed care and cultural humility. And so what that means is during the crisis response, our prefrontal cortex, which is our thinking brain, completely goes offline. And our limbic system kicks in, that fight, flight, or freeze response, so that we can protect ourselves from death, truly. And so another reason to safety plan is to have a plan in place to go over with the survivor, because in that moment of trauma, they may not be able to think as well as they'd like. Again, because all of the energy is going to survival. So all that to say, hypervigilance may be necessary. It's not a bad thing, most especially in this moment. I actually was just talking to a client earlier today and was saying that disassociation is not bad when we're trying to cope with COVID. So all of these things that our body have put in place so that we can survive, it's good to use those tools and to help survivors understand there's not a stigma to use those tools. Very important, if the survivor allows it, take that phone number down, take the location of the survivor down at the very beginning of the call and find out where the perpetrator is. Especially right now when everyone is very close proximity, that might be very, very important. As far as the worst thing that could possibly happen is you're in the middle of talking to a survivor and the perpetrator comes in and harms the survivor, and there's no way for us to call the police because we don't know where they are. So
Yeah.
just some basic things.
Yeah, I had done safety planning with a client, and she actually, before we got on the phone, emailed me telling me where her address is, and I had her phone number already. She just said, before we get on the phone, I want you to know where I am in case you have to call the police. And in that particular case, her perpetrator frequently interrupted our phone calls and they would get into an argument. So I'm glad, just keeping that in mind, to have something in place in case you do have to call the police.
So going into, these are the solution parts. This is the money of the presentation. So we're gonna, again, break it down into types of abuse and organize it that way. So physical, does a survivor have another place to stay or somewhere to go? Which may even become more challenging right now as folks aren't as open to accepting someone new into their house with COVID-19. So that's something to really drill down on and explore with the survivor. In Ohio, I know the stay-at-home order, the governor, when he released this statement, in the very first paragraph, he excused domestic violence victims as having to adhere to the stay-at-home order, and that if you're a survivor of domestic violence, you need to do whatever it is you need to do to stay safe. So it would be a good idea to kind of see within your state what those thoughts and those regulations are. You're going to find out would the client be willing to call 911 if they become unsafe. This may be different than other times because now they may have less of a guarantee that the perpetrator will be arrested. And so exploring that, and if they don't call 911, what will they do? When we look at the home, the kitchen and the bathroom are the absolute worst places to be during an argument because of the knives, because of the hard surfaces in the bathroom. Can the knives, the guns be hidden or be put up? Keep the cell phone on you and charge at all times. But what we know is sometimes it's just unavoidable. We would like where a person could not be physically harmed, but that might happen, and especially right now. And so maybe going over with your client, what are some ways to protect themselves if they do get into a physical altercation? So not wearing those dangly earrings or necklaces. Think about if your place of employment has things that you're not allowed to do. So for instance, we're not allowed to wear dangly earrings because the client could pull them out, right? Same thing. Necklaces can be used to strangle a person. A ponytail can be used as a handle. One idea that someone that I work with had was to run to her car. And so she knew that if something happened, she was not going to call 911, but she could run to the car and lock herself in it. And she knew that if she stayed in the car and gave the perpetrator time, that would be safe for her. If the perpetrator and victim don't live together, maybe putting plates in the windows so that if someone tried to break in, right? Because with COVID-19, it's easier to know where a person's going to be. They're going to be at home most likely. And so not everyone can afford a alarm system. So plates in the window that can fall and crash. You can also go to Home Depot and they have these little devices that you could put on the door. Last I checked, they were like $25. And when the door opened, it made a noise. So that's another idea, something inexpensive, because unfortunately, not everyone has the money to get an alarm system. In Ohio, at least, and I do believe this is across the country, protection orders can still be sought, but we always want to be careful to assess if that is the safer option, most especially right now, because the perpetrator is probably going to know where the victim is. And so what that might look like is they could change their work schedule, they can change, ways to get to work, but right now maybe they're not working. And with the stay-at-home order, maybe they're sitting in the house. So does the survivor think that the protection order will be effective? So one question, which I thought was so smart, is that the police have been called. Now what do we do? Because it might take 5 minutes. It might take 10 minutes. It may, in some places, take 30 minutes for the police to get there. How do you stay safe in that time before the police get there? So one idea that you can speak with the survivor about, is there a room that they can run to? Again, avoiding the bathroom and the kitchen. Can they put the kitchen knives up? Can they hide guns? Can something be wedged to keep the door closed? And then again, if there's no way to avoid physical confrontation, to curl into a ball to protect their head and their neck from different kinds of blows. So then again, and we're still on the physical piece, that it's not safe to call the police and you can't run to the neighbors because the neighbors don't want you there. because of COVID-19, what do you do? And so this is where that conversation with the survivor is important, and where it has to be individual. What makes sense? Is there a neighbor that would be more willing than another neighbor? Is there a shop down the street that's open? Those types of things. Again, looking at the home, what are the weapons? What's the layout of the home? Where's the doors? Where's the windows? Again, just like safety planning, just in general, but having that extra layer of understanding of what's going on with COVID-19. Are there woods around the house? Is there a separate garage? Those are just some ideas of things to discuss with the survivor.
So if survivors want to access shelter, we've heard a lot of different things in working directly with our clients, along with just State of Ohio working with our Ohio Domestic Violence Network. We are so grateful that they've been very flexible in finding new solutions during this time, because there is a lot of fear for survivors to go to shelters during this time, especially if they're very high risk and don't know what they're getting into, especially, and they could be in a dangerous situation and desperately need to leave. So luckily, we have been able to have survivors stay in hotels for a maximum stay of 2 weeks, and trying to figure out what we can do from then. Again, this is changing, feels like almost every day, but things are changing very quickly all the time. I think at one point, hotels were having an issue accepting people who might be positive for COVID. So now the shelters are taking those people in, and anyone else is staying in hotels. What we've been doing is trying to contact local hotels and ask for discounts or even donated rooms. I know at this point, I think I just even personally got an email yesterday from a hotel, and they were offering a huge discount. So this is something that agencies could likely access, especially in explaining the given circumstances. Now, I have had some issues with survivors seeking hotels at the same time. I had a client who called the police, got her stuff and left, and needed to find a hotel to go to, and she was actually turned away from a couple. They said she was non-essential and they were only housing essential workers, even though she works at a restaurant, so she is. And so I think another piece is establishing partnerships with hotels in your area. What's a hotel you trust? And again, looking at the policies of that hotel. How do they treat visitors? Are they gonna keep the client safe? The client I was speaking about, who eventually did end up at a hotel, they used an alias. So if someone came in and asked for her, her reservation wasn't under her real name. So these are some creative solutions if shelter isn't necessarily an option and there's funding to send the client instead to a hotel, or if a client is simply seeking a hotel themselves.
So then we talk about emotional abuse, and oftentimes emotional abuse kind of gets lost, right? Because we want to help the client maintain safety from homicide. I mean, truly, that's kind of the core understanding of our role. But these other types of violences also have an impact. And so with emotional abuse, maybe teaching the client self-care techniques. That might be positive self-talk, breathing exercises, meditation. 7-11 breathing is my absolute favorite. That's where you breathe in for 7 counts and you breathe out for 11 counts. And it's my favorite because it's so simple and you can do it and no one's gonna know what you're doing, and you can do it anywhere. Then talk with the client about teletherapy or telehealth. So we actually are seeing many of our clients by Zoom, that it's safe to do that. There are some clients that we are doing seeing by telephone, and then there are other clients that we are actually seeing by email, which has definitely been new for us and a little scary, and we just have to talk with them individually about whether that is the appropriate way to communicate. Most especially because email and texting, it might be the perpetrator or somebody else. There's no clear way to know if it's the survivor. So also something that did happen, not to our agency, but to another agency, when the survivor was on a Zoom call, the perpetrator was in the room listening. Again, that is something that could happen even without COVID, right? That someone's listening in to a telephone call, but it's just something else to kind of keep in mind and talk to the survivor about. Maybe having a code word, and the survivor says that code word so that you know that the perpetrator's in the room or that someone's in the house, that you wouldn't want them to hear what's going on. And then finally, just lie. I mean, this is about survival, right? So sometimes you just gotta lie and you gotta pretend and you have to just go along with the perpetrator and do whatever you need to do to survive. And that's even emotional survival. And then disassociation, which I talked about that earlier. Disassociation is kind of cool because our bodies created that, right? Disassociation means separating. And so that's a way that we survive as a race, that we can get through traumatic things. And so when we talk about emotional abuse, that disassociation can be an amazing tool in that moment.
Going back really quick to the lying piece, I had a client, she's inevitably stuck with her perpetrator and there's really no way around it. And so in the moment, we're talking about how can she live through these circumstances? Because at this point, going to shelter isn't an option for her. And she doesn't want to go to a hotel. Really, her only option at this point is to stay. And so again, it's that emotional safety planning. How can you survive right now with him? It's not going to be forever. It's just right now until she's able to leave when she does. But she felt bad about having to lie and go along with him, but kind of validating, this is what you have to do right now to survive. And so I think, again, like I said, validating to that client that this is their option right now. This is what they have to do if it's safest for them. So going into that with verbal, this kind of course, what we already know is that emotional and verbal abuse kind of go hand in hand. Same for emotional and verbal safety planning. So again, can the survivor use verbal affirmations to get themselves through it? Can they remind themselves to be gentle with them? And I think with a lot of the clients I work with, I remind them that this is not their fault, that they are not responsible for this, and finding creative ways for them to remember that so that they are not feeling as bad and are able to get through each day. Again, another option is to try to keep physical distance as possible. I just spoke with a client today and she said, I can't even be in the same room as my husband. We literally have to be in separate rooms at all times or he is just gonna verbally abuse me. And so I think this can present challenges based on where someone lives, but luckily for some areas it's getting warmer out, and so I think being able to go outside if possible, and especially with the kids being able to go outside if they're witnessing all of this as well. As far as solutions for sexual abuse and sexual risk factors, if possible, sleeping in separate rooms, making sure that you're planning ahead for birth control prescriptions. I know that it's possible to order a few months in advance. So if that's possible or available to people, just so that if they can't leave the house, they have what they need with them to protect themselves. And I know in Ohio and Texas, this was a couple weeks ago, but there was issues about whether abortions would still be accessible and threatening to close abortion clinics at this time. At this point, they do remain open. And again, this can differ by state. There just, again, may be longer wait times. It may be more difficult to schedule an appointment. So these are all things to keep in mind. in terms of solutions for spirituality, I have seen so many just on Facebook, on Instagram, creative ways for all faiths to stay connected. And whether this is worship services, whether worship services during the week, being able to stay in contact with leaders who may now be on social media. I think there's a lot of ways to still stay connected during this time, and people have been really creative with that. Another is just how can a survivor observe prayer, whether they can't do it, if it's not safe for them to do it in front of the perpetrator, what are some ways that they can do it, whether it's to themselves, that might not be what they normally would do, but during this time they might have to do that. And again, if it's possible, reaching out to spiritual support systems. If it's not safe to do that on the phone, maybe through text or just, again, through social media, creative ways to try to stay connected for survivors' own emotional well-being during this time. Another piece, again, is the financial, which how can survivors stay financially secure during this time? Again, like I said, one of my clients, her perpetrator had already spent all of her money, and which was very unfortunate. So can they open a bank account on their own? I know that really that can be done online. You don't have to go into a bank. And are there financial literacy resources that are available to do that financial safety planning, so that once things do open up again and things start to kind of go back to normal, if a survivor wants to leave, they can kind of begin that planning now with the extra time they might have to begin that process, budget, see what their rent would need to be, see what they can afford, all of that. And I think, yeah, go ahead.
So you can access all kinds of amazing forms online to help with that financial safety planning and financial literacy for survivors.
Yeah, I think Allstate has the Purple Purse Project. And I know just from the NCADV conference we were at, actually, they talked about so many financial resources. So check in with them. I know on their website, they have a lot of resources for that as well that you can share with survivors that they can do online. So, and again, I think another piece in talking about with this is how can a survivor stay technologically safe during this time? If they are accessing these resources online, is it going on using incognito mode on Google, making sure that they know whether their perpetrator is someone who could possibly see this? I always ask clients if their perpetrator is tech savvy, because if they're not, then we can be a little more relaxed. If they are, we kind of have to strategize together how they can, seek this information, do this planning in the safest way possible. So I think the important piece to understand is there's no perfect plan of safety, especially right now. A lot of survivors, again, plans maybe to have left are compromised. Everything feels like it's on hold right now. I've had so many clients say that everything's paused, divorces are paused, really things are not proceeding or moving forward. So it's important to reassure the client you're there to support them as much as possible, and just letting the area know that you're open still. I think that was a big piece. As this was starting, I tried in some way to reach out to all of my clients on my caseload to let them know we were still here if things change. I've had so many clients who I haven't spoken to in months reach back out to us because things have escalated. And so just like getting the word out that you guys are available and there to support them. Another piece is to check in with the local shelter. Are they open? What is their protocol looking like in terms of admitting clients? And what are kind of even looking at the broader counties, homeless shelters as well. I know here in Cuyahoga County, they are also doing hotels. So just seeing what your area is doing and how to support clients if and when things escalate to the point where they absolutely do have to leave. And I think that's the most important piece. Again, this is, as we're seeing things are escalating more and more, so giving survivors the tools and the education to learn how they can best safety plan for themselves so that when things do escalate, they can act because again, May mentioned that everyone's in a trauma response right now. And as we see, survivors can, they might freeze up, they might go into that fight or flight mode. So what are some tools that they can have in their tool belt that they can access naturally to keep themselves safe during this time?
So we want to talk specifically about solutions with children. I think that when we talk about safety planning with children, that oftentimes gets lost because children don't have as much autonomy as adults. And really the thing to remember is that when you safety plan with the survivor, then the survivor can in turn safety plan with their children. Again, so this is about teaching the survivor how to safety plan, and then they can teach their children. So creating a safety plan with the children is always a wonderful thing, most especially if they're old enough to understand that. Teaching children of all ages not to interfere in arguments, and that may keep them physically safe, even if they can see the argument, just teaching them not to become a part of it. Having any code words with kids, maybe saying a code word and then that code word means run to your room, or the code word means call the police, or call your aunt or your uncle. Okay. Also, emotional safety planning with children is just, if not equally, as important as safety planning with adults. Most especially because children don't have that autonomy, right? And so children might be shuffled from parent to parent and not have any control over that. I worked with actually a couple clients where the mother put on nail polish and then put that nail polish on her daughter. And so when her daughter was with the dad, who was the perpetrator, she could look at her nails and know that her mom loved her and she'd see her mom again. So things like that, people can be very creative. Teaching children grounding techniques. That 7-11 breathing, looking around the room, and then helping them understand when disassociation is a great tool. And so maybe before they go to the perpetrator's home, it's those grounding techniques. And then when they're at the perpetrator's home, it's using disassociation. And just to normalize that for the kids and normalize that for the parent, for the survivor. Teaching children about COVID-19. I think a lot of times we forget that kids know stuff. And so they're hearing all of these things from adults around them. And that sometimes can be even more scary than just being taught what's going on. Mm-hmm. And then again, just techniques that fit for the family, going back to that individualization. Mm-hmm. So before we go into trauma and self-care, I really wanted to talk more about technology, because really the whole webinar could just be done with technology safety planning. There are great webinars out there on safety planning specific to technology. I encourage you all to attend those, to look for those if possible. But especially right now, when we talk about, like I said, we are seeing clients through Zoom. We are talking to clients. That's our case management appointments on the telephone, and they're sending emails. We aren't taking texts right now, but I know many programs are. And so just going through with that client, I want to say again, to explore what are the dangers of technology and how can you plan around that. So there's one client who was married to someone very savvy, and the perpetrator could break into the Wi-Fi and have access to every single thing that the family had, computers, tablets. And so that safety planning was done, like, well, how do we do that? And then looking at that perpetrator was able to have a video conversation with the child every week because that's how the court kind of set it up. And so giving him access to email addresses, because he's so savvy, he might be able to tap into the Wi-Fi. So that's just one of many, many examples. I'm sure all of you have many examples, but just as a reminder to talk to the survivors about those different pieces.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I will add, sorry, I just want to add really quick too. And I know I have seen so many webinars come up because this is such a huge issue with technology. And I have seen, I will admit, I've been on TikTok since all of this has started and I'm ashamed of it, but I've seen a lot of people post stuff about like how to spy on people, younger people doing this. And so I learned, I'll just say this really quick, just so you all know, like if you have AirPods and you leave your phone in another room, there's a setting on your iPhone, I don't remember, but if you like turn on the setting, leave your phone in another room, put in your AirPods, you can listen to everything that's going on in that room. And so I think keeping this in mind, especially for very savvy perpetrators, that they might know this, and just all of the unique challenges we face with technology, like our Apple products all being connected, Alexa, like what are these, what are different ways that survivor safety can be jeopardized during these times? Okay.
So now we move to trauma and self-care, which is one of my very favorite parts of this presentation. It's so super important because we are all experiencing trauma right now. Throughout this presentation, I even had words that just fell out of my head that I couldn't even remember what the words were. And that is all part of the trauma experience. So we're working from our limbic brain. That's our emotional brain, right? And so this means that planning might be more difficult. So that's something to keep in mind, not only for survivors, but also for ourselves. I can't tell you how many of our staff have come to me and said, oh my gosh, May, like something's wrong with me. Like something's wrong with my thinking. But really that difficulty with processing, again, that's part of what's going on in our bodies and in our brains as we're going through the trauma response ourselves, those memory issues. So falling back on that trauma-informed care education and understanding that we also are experiencing that. So what's the solution? Every single week, if not every single day, my staff all checks in with each other of how we are all taking care of ourselves. What does that mean? And it can look different week to week, because truly we have to take care of ourselves in order to be well enough to help our clients. So what's the plan? What are you doing? How are you getting out the house? And then seek supervision. My hope is that all of you have wonderful supervisors like I do, and that seeking supervision is helpful to that self-care piece. And my suggestion would be that for every supervision to have a portion to talk about how you're taking care of yourself. I'd say in general, but especially right now, while everyone is very fuzzy. It's natural to be worried about clients in addition to everybody else. So many staff have said, I have had dreams about clients, which isn't necessarily abnormal, but even more so now, right? Because the way the theory goes is that during sleep, during REM, that's when our body is reprocessing our memories. And so having those dreams about clients or about other family and friends, or even yourself, is completely normal. And so normalizing that within yourself as well as others. If you're working from home, take breaks. This is something I had to learn the hard way. I would work from 8 in the morning till 6 at night without a break. That's ridiculous. So I had to schedule in some breaks and schedule in time to take a lunch, because when I'm in the office, we don't necessarily work every single minute, right? And so just kind of understanding that it's different if you work from home, but also if you're in the shelter even, making sure that you're taking those breaks because we all need that, especially right now. So then exercising, taking walks, setting a routine, all of those things I think are important just in general, but especially right now. And especially when we have the stay-at-home order and our serotonin might be lower because we're not out in the sunshine. And so that exercise, taking the walks, that's going to help increase our serotonin, which is like a happy drug in our body.
Okay. So yeah, these are resources that we have listed here, just national resources, because we have a lot of people from all different regions on this on this webinar, but also, you know, NCADV is also a wonderful resource for, at least as professionals, looking up resources on how we can support clients, but, you know, referring clients to whether these resources or local resources that you're aware of. And this is our contact information.
So our program is actually doing a webinar specific to the police and helping them understand some challenges that domestic violence survivors are experiencing right now. So if you are interested in attending that webinar, please don't hesitate to email me and I'll send you the information.
Excellent. This is Gretchen Shaw. May and Grace, thank you so much for this information. I'm going to attempt to take over the presentation again, if you all could just bear with us. Let me show my screen. And then we'll open this up for Q&A. Can you all still hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. All right, we do have a couple of questions. Some are, let me scan through them real quick. So someone asked if you could give advice for those who identify with part of the faith community. Like, what are some tips that they can take into consideration as they're working with people who share with them about violence?
So I think number one is to just have a very good relationship with whatever program, whatever domestic violence or sexual assault program is in your area. So then you can create what is the appropriate and the proper channels to refer someone. Also to have a very good basic understanding of domestic violence, the cycle of abuse, and also just to listen. And I know it sounds so simple, but that can really be one of the most difficult pieces. It is just to listen to a person and not try to give advice necessarily, or tell them what they're doing wrong, or even necessarily what they're doing right. It's just to validate that it's not their fault, and then to seek the local DV or SA support in your community.
Excellent. A couple of people asked if you're using a specific safety planning model, and if so, what the name of that might be?
Yes, it's the lethality assessment created by Jacqueline Campbell. You absolutely can just Google it and it'll pull up. And so we use that and we've adapted it to our purposes. And so just changed it. We've added some things, again, because of human trafficking. We also beefed up some sexual assault questions. So as times change and we get more training, we change it. But the basic model is Jacqueline Campbell.
Excellent. Another person says that their neighboring state closed liquor stores, and although they understand that alcohol does not cause domestic violence, you know, they feel it can definitely escalate situations. Have you heard of any cases? You know, do you have any thoughts on alcohol prohibitions, and, you know, has it helped victims in any cases that you're aware of?
And Grace, jump in if you have anything. I
Okay.
honestly have not heard anything specific when it comes to alcohol beyond, you know, people using it to cope. I mean, it is a coping tool, even though it can turn really bad. But I haven't heard anything specific about the effects of any kind of prohibitions right now.
Yeah, and I
Okay.
will say that just in the clients I've worked with, I mean, I haven't heard of there being issues. I mean, I'm sure we know alcohol does escalate the abuse. I haven't heard specifically that of this happening, but I did have a client who ended up relapsing. She had been sober for many, many, many years, but because her and her husband were both working from home and her kids were home, she ended up relapsing and is looking into an outpatient program. So I think that's something to keep in mind too, that of just how, again, as May said, victims use this as a way to cope. And if things are extremely stressful right now, that might be something they end up turning to.
Great, thank you. Another person is a DV advocate within the prosecutor's office, and she says that she has a few victims who she feels may be in very dangerous situations. She often wants to call to check on them, but she doesn't want the perpetrator to know that the victim is talking with her. Should she wait for those clients to reach out to her, or should she be more proactive and reach out to them?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, it's so difficult because I think that's something that all advocates struggle with is fear for our clients. And we're in a unique position that if our clients die, it could be from homicide, right? And that's something that we deal with every day. But I also think the reality is the client's the expert. And so having that conversation with the client, is it safe? How often do you want to call if you want me to call? Or do you want to call me? And setting those boundaries in place, and then just trusting that the client knows what they need to do to keep themselves safe.
Yeah, and I will say too, just because when this first started, I reached out to a lot of clients in the beginning, and I just stayed very, very general in my message. You know, I was like, hey, this is Grace. Give me a call back if you need anything. You know, like I trusted they would know who I was because I had talked to them before. And if they heard my name and needed my assistance, they would reach out. I think now more than ever, I've really held back from calling clients, especially frequently, just because things are always changing and I don't know what they're going through. And I trust if I try to get their email as well, again, like just if we do have to communicate, I can send them a quick message saying, hey, this is where you can reach me if you need anything, kind of putting it back onto them.
Excellent. Another person is seeking advice for a client she's working with now. The client, the abuser, has a cell phone plan that's connected to their 13-year-old son, and he is using that to track the mom and the family. And even though they think the mom can cut off the tracking device, the son is convinced that it's all right for their dad to know where they are and is then turning it back on. So taking into account that family dynamic, do you have any suggestions? You know, it's hard to control a 13-year-old who doesn't fully understand what's going on. She's just looking for some ideas or suggestions.
I wonder if there's a way for I believe you said it was the mom, for the mom to say, okay, these are the times you can have your phone. And to limit it that way. What I know is teenagers are a lot. They're a handful. They're not easy to control or to, you know, even if it's in their quote unquote best interest, like to keep them safe. So just kind of exploring, maybe that's an idea. Grace, do you have any ideas?
I don't know, because again, we don't know the dynamic of the family or what's happening, but I don't know. This happened recently with a client. She has teenage daughters, and I just said, have a conversation with your daughters. Like, tell, talking, being a little more transparent about the situation. And I know, again, it's case by case, but like expressing some of the concerns related to that and seeing if, I don't know, if the teen will be swayed. I don't know. Again, they're hard to control or convince sometimes, so
Yeah,
it's
that is
tough.
a tricky one. Okay, so other people, I think we're all of us in this field are braced for what we feel may be a surge in people
Yes.
seeking services after the quarantine's lifted. And this person's looking for suggestions of how they may be prepared to serve the influx and maybe modify services for that need. I should also say we are at NCADV are talking about that as well, and some of the others on the national level. And we're hoping to have some information available, but that is going to be a tough one for sure. But I'll turn it over to May and Grace.
Yeah, but so here's what when bad news becomes good news. So a few years ago, we actually saw a 30% increase of clients in our program, and we did not have the staff to manage that. And so we actually had to come up with a plan because we didn't want to not service survivors. So we had to come up with a plan to make the services that we're providing more manageable. So that way, at least we could still touch everyone as opposed to saying, okay, we're full, we're not taking more clients. And so I think just to have a very frank and open conversation within your program about what might work for you. I do think that a flood of clients is coming. It usually does happen after a disaster. And like I said, I've never seen the escalation go as quickly as it has been during COVID. So I absolutely believe that it will happen. And then just to give yourself grace, like understand we're all trying to figure this thing out. And maybe in the middle of your plan, you have to change it. And that's okay.
Yeah, and I think, May, I know we've been preparing and talking about it on a weekly basis now, but I think what we've talked about too is as if our caseloads increase, really needing to prioritize clients. And again, it goes a part of doing the best we can. There's only so many hours in the day. I feel like I can't fit everything into one day lately, but I think just prioritizing what needs to be addressed as soon as possible and where you can make referrals too. Like if I have a client who is in a relatively safe situation, but she just needs a therapist to process her trauma, I might make that referral gently and try to focus on clients who have more immediate safety concerns.
Excellent. This may not be an immediate solution. This is Gretchen with NCADV, but we are trying to put together quickly a webinar that talks specifically to funding, fundraising within this crisis and because of this crisis. So as soon as we have that information available, we will be publicizing it and making it available for people to join that webinar. So watch your email boxes and also check out ncadv.org/webinars where that information will be posted. And that may help some. Everyone's going to be needing everything they can get their hands on very, very soon, I'm sure. So thank you all for that. There are a few more questions. Someone mentioned gaslighting. And, they're just curious to know what tips you may have helping clients navigate that. They may not even always be aware that they are being gaslighted, but any thoughts you have on that would be appreciated.
Yeah, that's always a tricky one because I think you're right. They don't always know that's happening. And so it's just validating and normalizing. Because I think oftentimes survivors are surprised that the things they have experienced, other folks have also experienced. That's one of the reasons that support groups are so powerful. The isolation of domestic violence is kind of broken open. So again, validating, normalizing, practicing helping them understand what they can do when there's verbal abuse, and just trusting themselves, which all of these things sound simple, but they definitely are not.
Yeah, I have clients who I talk to, and they try to constantly prove to me that they're not crazy and that this is what they're experiencing. So again, that validation is so powerful. Telling them like, hey, listen, you don't need to tell me all of this. You don't need to rehash this. I believe you. Just that simple enough, because they're led to believe they're going crazy or that they are unsure of their reality. So just validating that and letting them know that others have experienced this as well.
Great. Okay, we have a couple of other questions here. You're getting a lot of kudos and praise for this wonderful webinar, so I'm sifting through that.
I'm so happy.
Yay!
People are saying that they really appreciate this and that they're learning a lot. Let's see. Oh, here, can you give an example of healthy disassociation and how a parent might phase that in with their children?
So when I talk about disassociation with clients, the example that I always use, which I'm sure many people use this example, is when you get in the car and then all of a sudden you're at work and you're like, how the heck did I get here to work? And so I think that having that base understanding of what disassociation is. And so many times children create worlds, right? And so I'm gonna try to keep my answers succinct because I could talk about this for the next hour. But so children can create worlds, and within that world, they're safe. And so what that might look like is, okay, the perpetrator is calling you names and yelling at you, right? And you feel horrible. I want you to envision your safe place, or because not safe place isn't always helpful for everyone, that terminology, your special place. And is mommy or daddy in that special place, right? Whoever the survivor is. Maybe they have a toy, like a stuffed bear, or I don't know. I have one kid that has a stuffed duck that they have with them that they carry between households. And so then they're able, when dad, who's the perpetrator, is yelling at that child can look at the duck and imagine that the duck is helping them with that safe bubble they create. So those are just some things. I mean, there's lots of really cool things that you can plan with children. Sometimes I think children are more resilient than adults, actually.
And I think too, there's technology, like there's things that I know we see it's not healthy sometimes to binge Netflix or access or like listen to music nonstop. You want to have that balance. But in these stressful situations, like if listening to their favorite band brings them peace and they can kind of disconnect in that way, or watching their show, like what are some ways while they're there? And that's honestly like something they just might tap into naturally as a way to survive.
Right. And just normalizing that, not only for the children, but for the parent. That, yeah, the child watched 7 hours of TV, but for right now, I think that's okay.
Yeah. Whatever they can do to survive at the moment, I think is okay. Right. I'm going through a few more. Let's see. Have you seen an increase in men or male identified reaching out for support?
We haven't. I'd be curious if that was happening, but we haven't seen an increase. We also haven't seen a decrease. But yeah, we haven't seen that.
Great. Another person is looking for suggestions on how to develop a relationship of trust while using teleadvocacy. And if you have suggestions for that.
That's a great question, because that's like a challenge. Because it's like not the same as meeting with someone in person. And even the clients I've been starting to build relationships with, like, how can we maintain this relationship? I think what I'll just say really briefly, and I'll pass over to May, is that I think it's just client-centered, and what, like, starting it off right away, like what is most important for them to focus on. What, like, normally in our intake process, we would go through like a whole assessment, like our lethality assessment. We would go through our papers. Like now we just kind of do our telehealth informed consent. Like we go over that necessary paperwork, but I kind of just lately have been jumping right into it with them and just seeing like what support do they need now. And again, they're the expert of their safety right now. They're the expert of what needs to happen. So really turning it onto them and giving them that power to make those decisions.
Yes, and along with that, to just reassure them that you're there. And so many people I've met don't realize the power of that. When it comes to these isolating types of crimes like domestic violence, sexual assault, that type of thing, just the fact that somebody is there to listen to you is really amazing. And I always talk to my clients about it. Therapy is the one place where it's all about you. And I would say that about advocacy as well. It's all about you. It's not about me. There's no reciprocity needed here. That whatever is going on with you is what's most important. And I think that starts to lay that strong foundation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, excellent. Another person asks, have you noticed an increase in calls or police reports involving more family violence? Example, like minors. So like teen violence against parents, siblings, or guardians.
So I actually have heard that. I've spoken with a few of the police and adjunct police people around us. And really right now, so I always give the example that when I lived with my sisters, I hated them. And now we're best friends, right? So just living with someone, whether you are an abuser or not, just being in that space without a break is difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Most especially, with schools closed and you're with the kids all day. I mean, it's a challenge for everybody across the board. And so that can also bring a new level of challenge, because maybe the police are called, but it's a family dispute. It's not domestic violence. And how can they differentiate that?
Yeah.
And make that call? And so that's just another kind of challenge that folks face within COVID.
Excellent. Okay, let's see. I'm just scrolling through the last ones. Oh, here's one that might be a tough one, but we can I'm sorry, I'm struggling to pronounce your name. Miss Mittal says, do you have any suggestions for the victims who are immigrants and depend for their stay in the country on the visa sponsored by the spouse who is the perpetrator?
Yes. So
Yeah.
this and I'm only laughing because this is so horrible, and it's really something that we face all the time. 11% of our clients identify as immigrants, actually. And so we have come across that prior to COVID and during COVID. And being an immigrant is super difficult right now in the United States. That's a whole presentation in itself. But just because we only have a couple of minutes, I think the key is to make friends with your local resources, because it's going to be different in all communities. Each community is going to be different. And also where they immigrated from, is there a community within your community? Are there resources? Those types of things are all very important to find out. So recently we did have a client that she is relying on the perpetrator to maintain her place in the United States and her daughters. And so what's happening is she's playing the game. She is telling him exactly what he wants to hear, because she's fearful that he might rescind his support for her daughter, not even for her, but just for her daughter. So I wish I had some magical, like, genius response to that. If you find out, please email me and let me know, because we haven't figured that out yet.
Sure. I should also say that on our COVID-19 and domestic violence page, we do link to organizations that work with immigrant and undocumented communities that may have more resources available. So check out the resource booklet there on the page, and you should be able to connect with others working on similar issues. So we are almost at time. There are a few more. I will take one or two more questions. One is, have you seen law enforcement make reports for criminal threats when abusers threaten to infect or cause COVID-19? Good one.
I haven't seen that, but again, we're not based in the police department, so that could be the reason why, because we're community based. Even though, you know, we have relationships, that could be why we haven't seen that. Grace, have you heard of that at all?
No, I haven't. I know like the police will, like if someone's spreading COVID, you know, there's like, I think things are changing so quick. Like as things come up, they're trying to catch up with laws and policies. So I don't, specifically in our area, I haven't heard that. That's an interesting point.
Yeah, very much so. Another person asks, you know, what do you see as resources for survivors who won't leave the abusive home without their pet? And that's incredibly common. We hear a lot about that. And
Yeah, Red Rover. Red Rover is an amazing resource, and I believe they're national.
They
I hope
are.
I'm not wrong with that. Okay, yes, and
Yeah.
so they will help put up a pet. So while the survivor goes into shelter, if that shelter doesn't have capabilities to take a pet, also Red Rover will help a shelter create capabilities to have pets. It's really an amazing organization.
Yeah, they're fantastic. For a more immediate need, we've heard of domestic violence programs paying pet fees for, like, for instance, if they're able to house someone in a pet-friendly hotel, they will be able to pay for, you know, those pet services. There's also the PAWS program, PAWS, where you might be able to get more information, and then the National Link Coalition, which exists specifically to address the connection between animal abuse and domestic violence. So I've also heard of other programs who may not have an established pet support program in their area, work with local rescue organizations as well as animal shelters, and in most cases they're able to find success there. So also, yeah, so Red Rover, I see Red Rover is not in West Tennessee. Have you reached out to Red Rover directly to see? I know they give healthy grants to establish pet programs as well. So I can, she says she's spoken with them directly. Interesting. Okay. Well,
it's a challenge.
Specifically, but it is a challenge. It's really hard. There's just never, ever, ever enough money to go around for everything. Victims of abuse, and it's quite frustrating to watch. But Danielle, if you could reach out to me directly, I might be able to help direct you to other services. Let me offer my email address real quick, and we'll call it good. So we thank you. Want to say a special thank you to May and Grace. We appreciate you so much again for reaching out to us to talk to us about this webinar. We appreciate your time and information. You've just been lovely to work with. Others, please remember to fill out the survey as you close out of the webinar. You will be receiving an email with a copy of the webinar recording, as well as links to the PowerPoint and a certificate of attendance. Again, visit our COVID-19 specific website and our webinar page for future webinars. So thank you, everyone. Hang in there, and we wish you a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
You take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.